Tell us about the research and how this came about and what we're told and how perhaps it might not be the whole truth.
Yeah, I got to start by talking about regulatory capture. I was interviewing Robert F. Kennedy Jr. I was really honored to be able to talk to him after many years of following his work as an attorney who he's an attorney who worked on cases against Monsanto and won, and also against DuPont, which inspired the movie Dark Waters. If you saw it,
Oh,
great movie in
sure.
2019. So
Mhm.
when I saw that movie, I was really shocked, and I went to bed at night kind of feeling down. It's just such a sad story that certain companies are so in bed with regulatory agencies that they can get away with anything. They can get away with poisoning communities. And this is what's happening with wireless. Robert F. Kennedy Jr. told me, Nick, this is a textbook example. The perfect example of regulatory capture is the big telecom companies and the FCC in the United States that's supposed to regulate the industry, but in reality, they're allowing the industry to do whatever they want. They're really people from the industry are the directors of the SCC. And each time there's a new director, it's always someone who's been either from the industry or the industry lobbying group, the CTIA. So it's the revolving door policy we saw with Monsanto and other big fields or corporations is the same thing. So I got to start with that because it puts everything in perspective. How is it possible that our safety guidelines, for example, date back from the 1990s and talk about exposure to one cell phone for a few minutes? How is it possible that we're still stuck with these EMF safety guidelines 30 years later? It makes no sense. It
And
only
and
makes sense if you understand that the FCC is allowing the industry to do as much cash as possible. And then you understand, okay, well, if they keep the status quo, then business as usual is good. And the EMF limits at the moment, how much is allowed, how much we are allowed to be exposed to, is the highest in the world, in the US and Canada, and also in Australia. Many other countries have limits that are orders of magnitude lower. Even China has limits that are way, way, way lower. Russia and many Eastern European countries, the Nordic countries, most European countries, in fact, have lower limits. Even then, these limits are far from being safe because they're based on the wrong assumptions. So what's happening at the moment, though, is that even with these false limits in place that are insufficient, for which the FCC was sued by Children's Health Defense and Environmental Health Trust. And just something out of the breaking news last week, they won against the FCC after more, I would say, years of fighting against their decision not to review these old deprecated guidelines. The FCC said, oh, no, we're not going to review that for no decent, valid reason. So the judges in the Washington Court of Appeals said, well, it doesn't make sense. So now you're forced to look at the data with EMFs and children. So that's a big win. It means that the FCC, we're recognizing now that their limits are not protective for the public. So that's declared by law at the moment. We'll see how it ends up changing the course of history, but that's a big positive news for you. But let's backtrack a little bit to
yeah.
understand, okay, well, there's not just the US, that's a global worldwide problem. So organizations such as the WHO, for what it's worth, they have a branch, the IARC, International Agency for Research on Cancer. And in 2011, they convened a meeting with 36 scientists and industry people looking at the data on cell phones and brain tumors specifically, or cell phones and cancer. And that's the goal of the IARC, is to look at carcinogenicity in different agents. So they looked at the data, and after a few days of meeting, they said it's a class 2B carcinogen. That's the lowest classification you can attain. It says it's a possible carcinogen. It's not either. It can become, then, if it gets higher in the classification, probable 2A carcinogen or a class 1 definite carcinogen, examples being smoking and asbestos. But here's the twist, and a lot of people are still stuck with that idea, oh, it's just 2B, and again, it's no big deal, and they like that comforting idea that there's nothing there because everyone is in love with their devices, and I think there's some cognitive putting their heads in the sand kind of thing going on, because they say, well, I hope it's not a carcinogen because I have one in my pocket every single day, and I have one here and one in my bra.
And how would I live without it?
I don't live without it. It's under my pillow, and my kids now have it. So I sure hope that it's not a carcinogen, right? Because
And they wouldn't allow it to be. They feel like they're protected.
exactly. But the problem is this: in the last 10 years, since 2011, that's 10 years worth of new science that has come out. Epidemiologists such as Dr. Anthony Miller, who's really at the top of his field around cancer epidemiology, looking at what impacted the population and what might have caused brain tumors or other illnesses, and backtracking, looking at that data and analyzing it in an independent manner, he said, well, looking at the data that has come out since that 2011 decision, it should be urgently reclassified as a class 1 carcinogen. Tomorrow morning, it should technically be a class 1 carcinogen. It's just that the IARC has not convened that new meeting, and we don't know when it's going to happen. They did say 2 years ago that, yes, we will look at that agent electromagnetic pollution again in the future. We don't know if that's 2024 or so. In the meantime, we're really left in the dark. And the reality is that if we take the science that we have now, it is already a class 1 carcinogen for when it comes to brain tumor. But for other things that it might impact, for example, male and female fertility, we do know that for years and more than a decade, the Cleveland Clinic, in its very mainstream information, right? That's not something out of the fringes. It's a very prestigious university in the US that is known in the medical sphere. And they said, do not put a phone in your pocket, man, because we know that it will reduce your sperm quality. And we know also in parallel, there's a massive reduction in male fertility in the Western world, if you will, or in rich countries where people have access to these smartphones. So put 2 and 2 together, we should probably not have that behavior. And what is damning is that in the meantime, it is silence, radio silence from authorities. And the only way that governments are talking openly about these problems, and this is true for nearly every government out there, is when they're forced by law to do so. For example, in Italy, the Supreme Court has forced the Italian government to inform their citizens about cell phone dangers after it's been proven in court, at least, that I think it was 2 or 3 different people claimed their brain tumor was caused by cell phones, and it has been found to be causative. So, of course, that's not a scientific inquiry. It's by law and showing proof in front of the judge. But still, at that point, the Supreme Court found it so damning that the government was not informing anyone about these dangers. They said, now you got to have an information campaign for your citizens. But in the meantime, here in Canada and where you are in the US, it is not only radio silence, it is ridiculed. So that's something we see with many topics, right? The ridicule. So it's, you're a tinfoil hat guy. So that's why the title of my book, The Non-Tinfoil Guide to EMFs, that was the idea, because I saw that deprecating comments about, oh, okay, yeah, you wear a tinfoil hat and this is nonsense. In reality, this is an urgent and very serious environmental toxicity problem, but people have been lured into thinking it's not serious, and it's just something you talk about when you talk about UFOs and some fringes of the internet. It's really, really not that. So unfortunately, so in the meantime, we are still waiting for science to evolve, of course, but we have plenty of evidence to start taking action now and put in place the preventative measures to, well, first of all, not not develop a brain cancer, because it can kill you. So that's the first thing. And then if it can harm your fertility on an everyday basis, you should probably tackle this too. And then number three, I would say it can probably negatively impact your sleep. So if you're looking to live a healthy life and you have no idea why is it that your sleep is so bad, or that your sleep quality is so bad, EMFs could be one of the causes. And unfortunately, again, it's one of the most often overlooked factors in sleep. People will think about, I'm going to take melatonin, and maybe, yeah, I hear about blue light before bed, not staring at your devices too much, and that's good. But they forget that EMFs is also part of the important factors to consider. And when they discover that through, your podcast or other people that are talking about this, or my information, then they try to reduce EMFs at night, and many people report better sleep. So right there, you have tremendous benefits that are right around the corner with just simple changes of habits when you minimize that exposure.